It was a cold, silent night in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. The moonlight cast eerie shadows through the thin curtains of Emily's bedroom. Outside, the wind whispered softly, rustling the dry leaves on the ground. Inside the house, everything was still, except for the faint sound of Emily's steady breathing as she slept. Suddenly, a chilling presence stirred in the darkness. From the corner of the room, just beyond the faint glow of the street lamp filtering through the window, emerged a pale figure, gaunt, with unnervingly long limbs and sharp claws that scraped lightly against the wooden floor. Emily's eyes snapped open. She couldn't move. Paralysis gripped her body as a cold breath brushed against her face. The figure didn't speak. It simply watched. Her heart thundered in her chest, each beat echoing like a drum in the heavy silence. She tried to scream, but no sound came. The creature, known only in hushed whispers as the Rake, stood just inches away, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. Time seemed to freeze. Minutes passed like hours. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the pale figure vanished into the shadows, leaving Emily trembling and drenched in cold sweat, wondering if it had all been a nightmare. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Outside, the wind carried a faint, eerie whisper, like a warning to those who dared to sleep unaware. The next morning, Emily woke with a pounding headache and a lingering sense of dread. The room felt colder than usual, and the faintest chill clung to the air like an unwelcome guest. She tried to shake off the terrifying memory of the previous night, convincing herself it was just a bad dream. But deep down, something told her otherwise. As days passed, strange occurrences began to plague her home. At first it was subtle. The flickering of lights, soft scratching noises coming from the walls, and shadows that seemed to move on their own. Emily told her parents, but they brushed it off as imagination or stress. One night, the paralysis returned. This time, Emily could feel the Rake's presence, closer, more insistent. Its cold breath brushed her skin, and its glowing eyes burned into her soul. She struggled to move, to scream, but the invisible grip held her tight. Suddenly, a whisper floated in her ear, chilling and unintelligible. The creature seemed to feed off her fear, growing stronger with each passing night. Desperate, Emily searched online for answers. The name The Rake appeared in forums and chilling stories. An entity said to stalk its victims at night, paralyzing them and leaving them scarred with nightmares and unexplained marks. Fear settled like a stone in her chest. She wasn't alone, and worse, the Rake wasn't done with her yet. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the sinister promise that this was only the beginning. As the nights grew darker and colder, Emily's terror deepened. She became a prisoner in her own home, afraid to close her eyes lest the Rake come again. Each evening, the shadows lengthened unnaturally, creeping along the walls like living things. One night, Emily decided she couldn't face it alone anymore. She confided in her older brother, Jake, who had always been skeptical of ghosts and monsters. But as she described the paralyzing fear, the whispers in the dark, and the cold breath on her neck, Jake's skepticism faltered. That very night, Jake stayed up late in Emily's room, determined to catch whatever haunted his sister. The house was deathly silent, except for the ticking of the clock and their uneven breaths. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted. Jake's breath formed a mist in the air. Then, in the corner of the room, a pale figure appeared. Its gaunt face, razor-sharp claws, and eyes glowing with a hellish light. The Rake was real. Jake froze, heart pounding. The creature's gaze locked onto him, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed the room would collapse under the weight of its malevolence. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the Rake vanished, leaving behind a cold, empty silence. Jake knew now this was no ordinary nightmare. They were dealing with something ancient and cruel, something that would not rest until it had claimed them both. The morning light did little to chase away the shadows that clung to Jake and Emily. They exchanged worried glances, both understanding that the creature was no longer just a nightmare. It was stalking them. Jake decided to research the Rake, digging into local legends, obscure folklore, and old news archives. The more he read, the darker the story became. The Rake was said to prey on those who encountered it, appearing first as a shadowy figure in their homes, then hunting them relentlessly until they vanished without a trace. That evening, Jake and Emily prepared for the inevitable. They barricaded the doors and windows, lit candles, and kept a constant watch. The house groaned under the weight of silence, every creak amplified in the stillness. At midnight, the air grew cold again, and the unmistakable sound of claws scraping the floor echoed through the hallways. Jake gripped a makeshift weapon, an old metal rod, while Emily clung to his side, trembling. Suddenly, from the darkness, the Rake lunged. Its hollow eyes burned with fury, its nails scraping the walls as it moved with unnatural speed. But this time, Jake was ready. He swung the rod with all his strength, striking the creature. The Rake hissed, a sound like nails on a chalkboard, and recoiled into the shadows. But it didn't disappear. Instead, it circled them, waiting for another chance. The battle had begun, and it was only a matter of time before the hunter became the hunted. The night stretched on, thick with fear and whispered breaths. Jake and Emily's home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison where darkness watched their every move. The Rake's presence seeped into the walls, its cold breath brushing against their necks, its unseen eyes waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. Hours passed in agonizing silence. Every shadow seemed to flicker. Every floorboard groaned beneath invisible steps. Exhaustion clawed at their minds, but surrender was not an option. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed from the corner of the room. Emily's eyes widened as the grotesque figure of the Rake emerged from the darkness, its pale, emaciated frame twisted in unnatural angles. Its razor-sharp claws gleamed under the faint candlelight, and its hollow, pitch-black eyes locked onto them. Jake raised his makeshift weapon, heart pounding. The rake lunged, faster than before, its claws grazing Jake's arm, drawing a thin line of blood. Pain surged through him, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He swung the rod, catching the creature's wrist and forcing it back. Desperation filled the room. Emily grabbed a nearby lantern and hurled it toward the rake. Flames erupted, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. The creature screamed, a chilling, inhuman sound, and recoiled from the fire, retreating slowly into the darkness. But as the first light of dawn broke through the windows, Jake and Emily knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The rake had been wounded, but it was far from defeated, and the shadows promised it would return. Dawn's pale light barely penetrated the thick curtains, but to Jake and Emily it felt like a fragile shield against the lingering nightmare. Their bodies ached from the night's struggle, bruises and scratches marking their skin, proof that the monster was real. Yet, even in the safety of daylight, fear clung tightly to their minds. They knew the rake was no ordinary creature. It was ancient, a shadow born of forgotten fears, a predator feeding on despair and torment. Emily, trembling but determined, pulled out an old worn book she had found among her grandmother's belongings, a tattered journal filled with cryptic notes and drawings of a similar creature. The pages spoke of an old legend, a pale, clawed beast that prowled the woods, hunting those who dared to walk alone at night. The rake was said to be cursed, a soul twisted by rage and sorrow, bound to the shadows it haunted. Jake's eyes scanned the text, searching for a way to fight back. The journal hinted at a ritual, a desperate attempt to banish the creature back to the darkness from which it came. But it required more than just courage. It demanded sacrifice. As the sun climbed higher, the wake of their fate settled over them. They were caught in a deadly game with a creature that thrived in darkness and despair. And the clock was ticking. The heavy silence in the cabin was broken only by the flickering of the single candle that Jake had lit on the wooden table. Shadows danced along the walls, seeming to breathe with a life of their own. Emily traced her finger over the faded symbols sketched in the journal, each line feeling like a thread pulling her deeper into a terrifying unknown. Jake's voice was low, steady despite the pounding of his heart. This ritual, it needs to be done at midnight. We have to draw the circle exactly as it's described. And the sacrifice? It says one must offer a part of themselves, a piece of their soul, to trap the rake. Emily swallowed hard. The price was steep, and fear clawed at her throat. But they had no choice. If they failed, the rake would return, hungrier and more vengeful. Outside, the wind howled through the trees like a warning, branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers. Time was slipping away. As darkness fell again, Jake and Emily prepared the ritual space. They arranged candles, salt, and the strange talismans from the journal. Emily felt the weight of her own dread as she balanced the knife, ready to draw the final symbol, the mark that would bind her soul to the circle. The air grew colder. A low growl echoed from the woods, closer this time. The moment had come. Midnight struck with a sudden chill that swept through the cabin like a ghostly breath. The flickering candle flames trembled, casting erratic shadows that twisted and writhed on the walls. Jake and Emily stood within the circle, their hands trembling but resolute. The air inside felt heavy, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Emily gripped a knife tightly, tracing the final symbol onto the floorboards. A sudden, piercing scream cut through the silence, a sound not of this world, raw and filled with malice. The rake had arrived. From the darkness beyond the circle, pale, clawed fingers scratched at the boundary, trying to break through. Its hollow, black eyes locked onto Emily, filled with a hunger that seemed to consume all light. Jake began chanting the incantation from the journal, his voice shaky but gaining strength with each word. The cabin vibrated with energy as the ritual took hold. Emily felt a searing pain in her chest, as if something invisible was tearing a part of her soul away. The rake howled, a sound that echoed through the forest, then writhed in agony as an invisible force dragged it back, binding it to the circle. But the price was clear. Emily collapsed to her knees, breath shallow, eyes glazed. Jake caught her just before she fell, whispering, "We did it, but at what cost?" Outside, the night seemed still once more, but the darkness carried a new, terrible secret. The dawn crept slowly over the horizon, pale light seeping through the dense forest canopy. Jake sat beside Emily, her breathing shallow but steady. The cabin felt different now, hollow, yet heavy with the weight of what had transpired. The ritual had trapped the creature for now, but Jake knew deep down the evil was far from gone. Emily's eyes, once bright, now held a shadow, a haunting reminder of the price they had paid. As they packed to leave, a faint scratching echoed softly from the floorboards beneath the ritual circle. Jake's heart sank. The rake was not finished. Outside, the forest seemed peaceful, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes watching, waiting. The nightmare had been contained, but the darkness lurked just beyond the edge of light. "Whatever happens," Jake whispered, "we have to remember, it's still out there." And with that, they stepped into the new day, changed forever by the horrors they had faced.